that's me and Alvin in his studio. Some wonderful guitar playing. And I'm going to do a little tribute now. I was playing with a band called the Bow Street Runners. We had a singer called Mike Patto. And we were playing a show in Nottingham at the Dungeon, which was a famous R&B club in Nottingham. And Mike said to me, you've got to meet this friend of mine's coming tonight. He's a guitar player and singer. He's got a band called the Jaybirds. And I was introduced to Alvin. That's when I first met Alvin. I think I was 18. He was around about the same age as me, so he was 18 as well. And he really liked the band, and I hadn't heard him play at that point, so I had no opinion of what he was, what his talents were. But that was when I first met him. I didn't see him again until we were all living in the Madison Hotel in Paddington. It was a strange place. A lot of rock and roll bands lived there. They had rooms with 2, 3, 4 beds, and you paid like £5 a week each. Everyone lived in the same room, and Alvin and Leo Lyons, his bass player, were living underneath us, in the room underneath us. I was in a room with Boz Burrell, Mike Patto, Barry Wilson, the drummer, and I can't remember if it was anyone else. Might have been just the 3 of us. But that was when I met Alvin again, and that time the Jaybirds were backing the Ivy League, I believe, who were a vocal group. They were still called the Jaybirds, but they were about to become 10 years after. I didn't really meet Alvin again until a little later. They formed 10 years after. Went off to America, didn't see them for 3-4 years because they toured constantly, ending up playing at Woodstock, which of course is famous now, the 11-minute guitar solo. And it wasn't until we were out on a gig. Mike was with Mike Patto. I wasn't playing with his band, but he had a band called Patto. They were playing, and Alvin and his girlfriend came to see us, and we all went back to his house. And by that time, he had bought a big house called Hook End Manor in Berkshire, I believe, just outside of Henley. And he was thrilled to see us. I think he was tired of touring. He told me he was planning to make an album with a singer called Mylon Lefebvre, and he wanted me to play some Hammond organ on it and piano, which I did. Lots of famous people came and played on that record. There was one amazing moment during that recording where next to the studio, Alvin's studio, there was an indoor tennis court. It was converted originally from a stables, and they had converted it back in the 60s into an indoor tennis court. And we had a mic in there, and he was recording some vocals with Mylon in there, and somebody came over from the house and said there's a storm coming, big storm. So we thought, oh yeah, okay. So well, we heard the thunder and we thought, well, we'll just ride it out. Well, the storm got worse and worse, and finally we felt the building shaking. So we rushed in there, pulled that old Neumann mic out of there, and lo and behold, about an hour later, the roof collapsed on that tennis court, which was pretty frightening, and because we'd all been sitting in there doing backing vocals. But yeah, so I did that album, and it reunited my friend. Well, that's where we really got tight, Alvin and I. We realised that we enjoyed playing with each other, and when he played guitar, I played keyboard, and it went on from there. That night we went back to his house. We were very impressed with the house. It was a big house. And that was when we started to talk about playing some music together. We had never done that before then. Although we'd known each other, we hadn't really played together. And that was when he started to build that studio, which at the time was a state-of-the-art studio, 16-track, analog tape machine, a Helios desk. And I remember Ian Wallace, the drummer, and myself were putting up some of the panels in the studio towards the end of the building of it. And we played a lot of music in that studio, trying it out before he did the album with Mylon, and played a lot of music after that too, including a lot of his records. But the gap was probably between about 66 and 70, probably about 3 or 4 years. That was, I think Woodstock was what, 68, was it? Or 69. 69. I think after that they just constantly toured. And I think Alvin was tired of it. He'd got tired of it. And like a lot of bands that toured constantly in those days, it got old pretty quick. Bands didn't last very long. On the Mylon album, Ian Wallace, Boz, Mick Fleetwood played some drums, Steve Winwood, Jim Capaldi, and George Harrison. Mylon was an interesting character. Mylon and Alvin were worlds apart. Mylon was a gospel singer and had crossed over into rock and roll, and it was a strange combination. I remember when they came down, they were having their photograph taken for the album cover, and I remember they came downstairs, and Mylon had this, he had this long like Louis XIV hairdo, and this denim suit with crosses all over it, and a big frilly shirt, and he walked downstairs, and Alvin took one look at him and said, "I'm not having my photograph taken with you looking like a poof." And he had to go back and put a denim shirt and denim jeans on. But Mylon was a hustler. He was a good hustler too, because George came over and Mylon said to him, "Well, George, I'd really like to do one of your songs." And George said, "Well, there are plenty of them around, just pick one, And Mylon said, "Well, George, I couldn't possibly do as good a version of one of your songs as you've done, so it would have to be one that hadn't been recorded." So George Harrison wrote a song called "So Sad No Love of His Own," which sort of summed Mylon up, I think, really. George was good at that. He could write songs really deep into the heart of somebody. But that was an interesting session, and it was the second time I'd met George Harrison, but only the first time in the studio, and he was great too. He was very easy to get along with and a lot of fun, and joined in with everything. That was an interesting record for Alvin, I think, because it was the first time he'd stepped out of 10 years after, and he was in a different environment. And I think as George went off and did the Jackie Lomax album when he was fed up with the bickering that was going on with the Beatles. And I think people just get tired of each other when they're slammed together constantly. And he really enjoyed making that record, Alvin. And it's a great record. It still stands the test of time. Alvin decided to do a solo concert at the Rainbow. We did 2 nights at the Rainbow. We rehearsed for, probably 2 weeks, I think, at Hoogane Manor. The lineup was pretty impressive. Ian Wallace was on drums. Alan Spenner was on bass. Alan played with Joe Cocker at Woodstock, and was with the Grease Band. Neil Hubbard, the guitar player from the Grease Band, on rhythm guitar. Mel Collins on saxophone. The Kokomo Singers, Diane, Paddy, and who's the third one? I can't remember. Anyway, there were 3 singers, and myself on keyboards. And we rehearsed, I think, 27 songs. We rehearsed really hard for that show. I seem to remember Neil Hubbard dropping his guitar at one rehearsal and saying, "I can't play anymore." It's quite funny. But we did 2 nights there. It was filmed and recorded. The album came out, double album called In Flight. Alvin told me that they had lost the movie. It's around there somewhere. You know that. There's a film can sitting somewhere with that film in it. It would be nice to see that. I think that was really a great moment for Alvin. I think it was around 1974, 5, something like that. And it really, for me, it was Alvin at his best, at his prime. It was a great show. The band was cooking. I think there were 3 Beatles in the audience at the time. George, Ringo and Paul all came to that show. And it was really great, and it was a shame that that band couldn't somehow pull it together to go out on the road. The band that went on the road was a different band, wasn't the same band. But it was everything Alvin wanted to do, I think, at the time. It covered a lot of bases, and it was quite a production. I believe, if I remember right, I think we had Emerson Fittipaldi's Formula One racing car on the stage at the. Nobody could see it because it was black and gold and it sat in the corner. But I did sit in it at one point. It was pretty scary to sit in. You didn't see anything out of it. But yeah, it was a great show. I enjoyed that show. I think that was a great moment in time, and a great band. Hopefully the film will surface at some point. Oh, Sam, his dad. Sam and his mum Doris. Yes, lovely people. Sam was a real character and was a real blues and jazz fanatic. And there's a lovely story about Alvin and... I'm not sure whether Alvin actually went to the show, but anyway, Big Bill Broonzy was playing somewhere near Nottingham, and Sam, he may have taken Alvin to the gig, I'm not sure. But as Alvin told it, he woke up at 2 o'clock in the morning and heard this noise downstairs in the house. So he wandered down, and there was his dad and Big Bill Broonzy playing guitars and drinking whiskey and singing the blues and playing the blues. And I'm sure that had some profound effect on him. He had that blues thing, really. He was steeped in it, and he had a lot of his dad's records. He actually put them all on 1/4-inch tape one time, and we listened to a bunch of stuff. Some really interesting stuff. I'd never heard it before, but some very, very interesting recordings, and some of them probably quite rare. But yeah, his dad was lovely. Sam was gorgeous, and I'm sure that you know, listening to those records and all that history of blues and jazz had a good effect on Alvin. Before he got out of Hook End Manor and went to a place called Huckendon Farm, which was a smaller house and much more manageable. Hook End Manor he sold to, I believe, to Dave Gilmour, who then sold it to Trevor Horn. It is still a residential studio, but it was a huge, big place, and just far too big. And Huckendon Farm was much smaller, and we had a really great studio there, and that's really where Alvin and I did a lot of music. Lots of music. We just used to play, just the two of us. I would just go down for the few, 3 or 4 days, and we would just write songs, and we would just, make music. And there's lots of it around. There's lots of it on tape. Some of it came out on his records, and some of it didn't. That was where we were writing a song. I had a band at the time called Heart and Soul Band. And we were trying to write a song for it. We didn't have a title, we just had a little idea. And Alvin had his guitar on, playing, and we were trying to find a little groove for this song, and the light was flashing on the telephone. And so I said to Alvin, the telephone's ringing. And he said, oh, so he had his guitar on, so he picked up the telephone. Hello? Yep, busy. Yeah, call me in the morning, I'm busy, I'm writing. Okay, bye. And he put the phone back, and I said to him, well, who was that? And he said, oh, it's George Harrison, he wants to come and take over the session. And I thought, gosh, how many people would talk to George Harrison like that? And actually George loved Alvin for that, because he just treated him, and there was no hero worship there. And I think George really loved Alvin for that. And actually George did come over the next day, and we did write a song together called Heart and Soul. And I recorded it on my solo album. The demo is somewhere deep in the bowels of Friar Park, with George's lovely harmony on it and Alvin's guitar solo. Somewhere I've got a cassette of it, I think. That track never came out. It started off at Alvin's on a 16-track tape, and went over to George's, who had a 24-track So the 60 tracks came up in different positions on the 24, and you can do that. And then George and I worked on it and put a few things on it, but for some reason it never went any further than that. I don't know what happened. I can't remember. I mean, this was around the time when Alvin and George were hanging out quite a bit together. They only lived a little way from each other. I remember George taking us out in one of his cars one time. I think it was a McLaren. Gosh, that was like a rocket, that car. It had a driver in the middle and 2 passenger seats on either side. You had to really squeeze in it. Going like a rocket. And they got on really well, those two. I think they liked each other because they had respect for each other, and George loved Alvin because he just treated him like just somebody else, you know. That Huckenden Farm was really a great place. We had some wonderful times there, and Alvin's daughter was born 4 or 5 months before my daughter. Jasmine was born, I think, in the May. My daughter Sophie was born in October. So we both had these daughters born around the same time. When Jasmine was born, I was living in Fulham Road in Chelsea, and Alvin came round and played guitar for about 4 hours in my front room. And he was very prone to that. He loved to play guitar. He would just, acoustic guitar sitting there, he'd just pick it up and play for hours. And he could do that too. And loved to play, Alvin. But yes, he did go to Spain, and I was quite shocked when I first went there. It was a nice apartment just outside of Barcelona, but there was, all the trappings were gone. All the guitar collection and the cars and everything had gone, and I think he just got to the point where it was all just a bit too much for him, and he decided he wanted out. And I understand that too. And we actually, wherever he went, he had some form of recording system. He had a little system there in that place in Barcelona, and we played again, you know, as we always did when we got together. I went out there a few times. Then he moved to Marbella, or just outside Marbella, and a very nice apartment there right on the sea. And he built a little studio on the roof, which was nice. We did an album there called Sagitar, and I think I'm right in saying I think I was the only other person on that record. I think he had some drums. Trevor Moraes, who lived out there, the drummer from the Peddlers, played a couple of snare drum tracks for him, but I think apart from that it was just Alvin and myself on that record. We made a lot of records with just the two of us. He was very good at programming up a drum machine. It was a bit of a shock to me. Last March, coming up for a year, and though he was sort of semi-retired, I suppose, in Spain, he went out and did some shows, maybe 4 or 5 a year. We were planning to do some shows. I think in the April he was doing a show was supposed to do a show in Paris, and we talked about me going over to play on that. It was odd because I never you know, some of my other friends are gone, but I didn't really expect Alvin. He always seemed like he would be there forever. He's so laid back and easygoing guy. Just a bit of a shock, really. And I missed the phone calls. We'd have these 2-hour phone calls where we just rant and rave about modern music, and who was a blues player and who wasn't a blues player, and it was just a shock, you know, and very sad. And I still miss him, you know. Yeah, the music lives on. There's plenty of his music around, and there's loads of stuff that I've found that's never been put out, and maybe will get the light of day at some point. Alvin recorded masses of music. He always had like a little cassette player or a DAT player handy. If he thought something was good, he'd just lean over and press that, and we'd carry on. But a lot of the time, of course, he had a full-blown studio in his house. Moved to a house in Marbella just a couple of years before he passed away, and he had a full-blown studio where we did the very last album that he did, Still on the Road to Freedom. And I went over and played on gosh, I think about 28 tracks in 4 days. Again, we did that just basically 2 of us and a drummer. Richard Newman played drums on that. And so there was always some recording going on with Alvin. He was always putting something on tape or into Pro Tools or whatever. And there are masses of tapes from Hook End Manor and Huckenden Farm, 2-inch tapes all over. I mean, I think some of them got transferred, some of them died because they never were looked after properly. But there are. I've got some stereo masters of some demos that we did that are just great, wonderful. I want to play something.
That's alright, that's alright, my mama, any way you do. Well, mama, she gonna told me, probably gonna told me too. Son, that girl you're fooling with, she ain't nothing for you, and that's alright, that's alright.
Me and Alvin playing in the studio. That was his favourite music. He for sure adored Scotty Moore. It was one of his favourite guitar players. And yeah, and he loved Chet Atkins too, of course. You know, but that was his real big influence, that Scotty Moore guitar thing. Plus he loved, you know, he was also a good jazz guitar player too. I loved Alvin. He was just an easy guy to get on with, you know. I mean, he'd have his grumpy moments like everybody, like George did too, and but very laid back, very pure about his music. You know, I was talking the other day in one of the lectures here at SAE about how some artists are very pure about their music and some aren't. And Alvin was very pure about it. He would not play anything he didn't like, and he stood by that right through his whole career. He was also very good at letting it go. Some artists can't let it go; they want to keep it back. But he said, "It's done. It's out. Let's get it out next." He was good at that. But yeah, I mean, one of the icons. And for me, his playing was as good as any of the British guitar heroes, as good as any. He had very strong hands, Alvin. Very heavy, strung guitars. Those sound you get with heavy strings, and his acoustic guitar playing too. I think it was just because he had played so much guitar. He was a dedicated guitar player. Never stopped playing, and never did anything else. Ever. So that pays off. God bless you, Alvin.